Why should basketball star Caitlin Clark be earning more money than economics professor Richard Ebeling? Join Richard and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that y'all know brings you the principled case for the freedom philosophy, also known as the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who I've been friends with for more than 30 years now. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you. And you're right, it's been a few years. And I'm glad that we are both with our viewers and listeners once more.
Yeah, nice to have you all tuning in. If you're brand new and you're just discovering the Future of Freedom Foundation, come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our free FFF Daily. All right, Richard. So as we say, we've known each other many, many years. And during the course of those years, you have periodically lamented. Let me see. Wait a minute. My microphone here got disconnected. During those, you have periodically lamented and resented the fact that people in the sports world make a lot more money than you. And you've always stressed the fact that, oh, you're an economics professor and that your work is so much more valuable than some person that's putting a round ball into a hoop. And that it's life just isn't fair that you should get your salary, whatever it is, and I'm not going to ask you, but that it's significantly less than some guy that's throwing a basketball into a hoop. Now, I just read an article in the New York Times that Caitlin Clark, who I think by all accounts is the greatest female basketball star in history, has gone to play for Indiana and in the women's league there, and is receiving a salary of around $79,000, more or less. So I figured now your lamentations and your resentments are got to be diminished, because here's this huge basketball star and presumably you're making more money than she is. And so like the market is recognizing Richard Ebeling as much better and more brilliant, more talented than Caitlin Clark. What do you think about this?
Well, let me start over. What's basketball? Actually, the way you introduce this is unfortunately a mindset that dominates a lot of people's thinkings. But what's interesting, it differs in different areas. Now, you're trying to make that comparison. Well, I'm an important person. I'm a professor. I deal with ideas. I'm an intellectual. Why should a person who just dribbles get more money than me? Anyone can stop dribbling. You just take a napkin and wipe your mouth. Oh no, that's something different. Anyway, so but what's important here is not just this example, but the mindset in general. By which I mean is there is often resentment, particularly by, to be honest, academics and intellectuals. Why should people who are doing the important things, they deal with ideas, they want to do good works, they're artists, they're sculptors, they're great novelists. Why should they be unrecognized and make pittance compared to this person who never graduated from high school and invents some type of new washer for a faucet, a sink faucet, and makes millions of dollars? What is the justness of this? This guy doesn't even know who Shakespeare is, and he's living in a mansion because he made a stupid washer for a sink faucet or something. Um, and the idea that what we each earn in the market economy is no more and no less than what other people value our services as. Now, I can assure you, would I mind earning $1 million or more a year? I'm sure I can assure you my wife would appreciate it. But would I mind earning $1 million or more a year? Of course not. But the question is, what determines my salary in the marketplace, my niche, my corner, my specialization in the division of labor? And basically, that is a determination of what, given my knowledge, experience, qualifications, and skills, what are they worth in the arena of teaching? And the fact is that whether I'm at this institution of higher learning or that institution of higher learning, the wage that I'm offered, based upon each institution's judgment as to whether it would be worth having me there teaching at their place as opposed to some other, is a reflection of what they think my services are worth relative to someone else they could hire. And I don't make as much as a internationally recognized sports player or a Hollywood movie star or some great novelist who's been successful and made millions from writing romance novels or mysteries. But the fact is, the market evaluates what each are worth. Now, well, we have to be careful here when we say what the market is. This is just a covering term for what it means is that these are the other people in the marketplace. These are other human beings, our fellow members of our communities. They're deciding what service can I render for them? What do they value it as? What could they use with the money they otherwise would maybe spend for my services in some other direction? What is the opportunity cost of them hiring me to do something as opposed to hiring or purchasing something else? And this is basically just a matter of the judgment of our fellow human beings, what they think we're worth. Now, what we're worth then determines what our incomes are. And the incomes we earn then enables us to demand as consumers in the marketplace a certain total value of other people's services. And what we think their services are worth, including some of the very people who have maybe purchased what I have for sale just immediately in the past, is what I think they're worth to me. What do I think the baker is worth in making me a loaf of bread? What do I think the maker of a pair of glasses is worth to maybe enable me to see better and read better or more conveniently or at all? And so on and so forth. So all that the prices are in the marketplace, including for professional athletes, is a function of what others think they're worth. Now, we know that basketball players, football players, baseball players, they make millions. But why? Because the millions have come from each individual person interested in that sport, turning on the television and watching it on their TV, or buying a ticket to the stadium. And it's this person's little bit of money and that person's little bit of money for the ticket or watching TV and the value of the commercial time that is shown during the breaks in the sport event and so on. That all adds up to the revenues earned and the judgment by the teams hiring these players, what they're worth in generating this revenue. And therefore, it's each of us determining what these athletes' salaries, the movie stars' salaries, the economics professors' salaries are worth in the marketplace. And that's the justice of it. Who else should decide this, Jacob? Do we want some bureaucrat in Washington to determine what you or I are worth, what they think we should earn, and how much more or how much less? It's either the free choices and free exchanges of the marketplace in the eyes of our fellow human beings, or the power of the government using its coercive authority, and that's what government ultimately is, saying you will do this, you will not do that, and if you choose to try to do something else, we have the legal right to use force to make you conform to what we've dictated. It's either the state imposing these things or the free choices of ourselves and our fellow human beings in the free give and take of the competitive market.
Yeah, you raised a lot of good points. I think from an Austrian standpoint, we're both advocates of the Austrian school, the situation really raises a lot of Austrian concepts, the concepts of subjective value, the concept of consumer sovereignty, the concept of unions. And let's set aside, first of all, the perversions that have come into play in our economic system here, massive government intervention, massive government welfare. There's people making big money off government contracts, the so-called defense industry, and I put defense in quotation marks. Let's set aside that and just talk about what Ludwig von Mises called the unhampered market economy. That is a genuine free market, a market that's free of any government intervention. And in that kind of system, it's the consumer who's going to be determining who gets the money. I mean, it looks like, oh, the business is the one that's setting the salary, but it's really the consumer. And the fact that consumers love great big pro football games or basketball games, that's where they're going to direct their money instead of putting their money in with an economics professor. And that's the way a free society works, is the consumer is the king, the consumer is the sovereign. He's determining who's going to be making the salaries. And what's the interesting quirk in this is, though, is that Caitlin Clark is getting paid $79,000. Now, we know that's not a direct result of consumer sovereignty because this woman is very popular. She is drawing huge amounts of crowds, advertising, and so forth. One of the questions that's being asked is, should she be paid the same as a male basketball star? Well, again, in the male basketball world, they're drawing many more consumers than the female basketball area is. And so it stands to reason that somebody that's drawing a lot more millions of dollars in one sector is going to be paid more than a sector that isn't drawing the same amount of money, no matter how talented she is. Again, the consumer is sovereign. But what's interesting is that why is she only at 79,000? And this comes into play with, from what I could tell from the article from the New York Times, a union deal. That there's unions that represent the players, and they've somehow or another negotiated this thing where first year players all get this base salary. Now, I don't think anybody's feeling sorry for Caitlin Clark because her endorsements are in the multi-millions, I'm sure. So she's doing fine financially. But a union, sometimes people say, oh, a union is anti-free market. Well, it really isn't. It depends on each business. If people want a union in that business, it'll be there, and that's part of what a free society is too. Business can say, well, we don't want a union. The workers may say, well, or the players may say, we want a union, and you work it out, and that's all through negotiations. And then you've got the concept of subjective value. That every person's worth is valued subjectively by other people. There's no objective measure of what Richard Ebling's economics talents are worth. It's how other people value this. And that's in the Austrian school, the subjective theory of value. And you and I talked about it when we were discussing the classical economists in the 19th century. They all believed in the labor theory of value, that the value of something is determined by how much labor goes into producing it. Well, that was the big Austrian Revolution, that no, the value of something is entirely subjective. It's like beauty. It lies in the eyes of the beholder. And so if people value sports more highly than an economics professor, that's just subjective value. They're just placing their own subjective value on this. So when you put all this together, where you have subjective value and you have consumer sovereignty in the marketplace and an unhampered market economy, then people's resources are being directed to where they want to spend them and where they want to invest them. And as you point out, how could you find anything more just than that? And the fact that somebody is making more money than somebody else is just the luck of the draw, the fact that consumers want to go in that direction. Now, the other thing that we should keep in mind is that consumers are very fickle. And I remember Mises writing an article about this, is that, there's like, you take a housewife, she has no loyalty at all to a particular grocery store. If that grocery store starts, she may be shopping there for many, many years, but all of a sudden, let's say it changes management, the fruits and the vegetables are not as fresh as before, they're higher priced. She's out of there. She's looking for the best price for her family as she goes shopping. And it's the same for everybody. Right now, Amazon is, so popular, but if Amazon starts mistreating customers, or the prices are soaring highly as compared to other areas, people will be out of there in a minute. Again, it's the consumer sovereignty that prevails in an unhampered market economy. And it seems to me, Richard, that's entirely just when consumers are determining what people are making in the marketplace.
You had mentioned the fact that females, professional athletes versus male professionals. it ultimately comes down to what is the value of the individuals in a certain category or the individuals themselves. Now, I like old movies going back to the 1930s up until my own time. And I was reading some background information just the other day about the movie The Graduate, which was Dustin Hoffman's first major role. And the lead actress was a well-known actress named Anne Bancroft, Mel Brooks's wife. And she made a big chunk of money for performing that role. And if I remember correctly, Dustin Hoffman was paid, right? And this movie is now a classic, The Graduate. He was paid something like $12,000. That was his entire salary to make as the lead character, the male character in The Graduate. And it was saying that after his expenses, and you have to pay your agent, he walked away with $4,000. And that, after the filming and soon after that, because how long does, even back in the 70s, how far did $4,000 go? He started collecting unemployment insurance again as an unemployed actor. Okay. So would anybody consider Dustin Hoffman to be worth $12,000 today if he made a film or did a performance on Broadway, for example? Of course not, because he's a respected and well thought of and admired and liked actor. People want to see Dustin Hoffman because of his acting qualities and the type of roles over the years he's chosen to do, compelling, interesting, enjoyable. But when The Graduate was being planned to be made into a movie, and they were looking for actors, and in fact, their first choice was Robert Redford, but it was decided Robert Redford didn't seem like enough of a schnook. They needed sort of a schnooky looking guy. They picked on Dustin Hoffman, but who was he? He was a nobody. And so in the eyes of the consuming public, and therefore in the studio's eyes of what he would be worth to hire to do this role, he was $12,000.
Yeah,
And that's the same thing with all that we're talking about. And these evaluations change. After doing The Graduate and then Midnight Cowboy with Jon Voight, Dustin Hoffman went off, right? His salaries went into the millions. And that's because consumers now said, now this is the guy I want to see in a movie. Boy, that was great. I want to see him in the next movie. And it's the same thing with whether it's, as you were saying, someone who's selling groceries at the grocery corner store, or a professional athlete, or someone who's offering plumbing services, or a college professor, and so on. Now, again, I'll just go back to the point that you were alluding to too, but I pointed out, is that who would we want to be determining how much we earn? Our fellow human beings through the free exchanges and choices and competitive workings of the marketplace, or bureaucrats and politicians who have other agendas and their own notions of what something is worth that may have nothing to do with what our fellow citizens might think we're worth, if we're just determining our salary through the interplay with our fellow human beings. This is a matter of fundamentally of liberty, the freedom of choice, because the bureaucrats could decide, oh, Jacob Hornberger is worth double what he's currently making. Or they could say, well, in fairness, Jacob Hornberger is only worth half of what he's currently making. In the pecking order of the hierarchy of what things have value and are worth in their eyes, as opposed to our own eyes as someone offering a service, and we're saying, we'd be willing to do this for you if you'd be willing to cover this price. And then the buyers determining whether they think that's worth it or not. And then the higgling of the market would then decide what we actually are paid for services rendered. Ultimately, it is once again and fundamentally liberty or power, free exchange or the coercion of government. It sounds like a broken record, but at the end of the day, that is the fundamental issue that we face in society: freedom of choice and voluntary association and exchange, or the imposition of power through the state in determining these things for us, regardless of what we and others may think we're worth.
Yeah, your point about actors is really good, because how many times have we seen actors that are very, very successful, popular, and all of a sudden lose their popularity
Yes.
practically overnight? Some
Yes.
of them, they leave the acting profession
Yes.
entirely, even though they were at the top of the game. Why? Because consumers say, not not very attractive anymore. As an actor, I don't want to go see that actor anymore. You see it in the music business, like in the rock and roll business. How many stars have risen to the top of the top 100 or even the top 10,
And then
uh,
down.
then down? Again, it's a state, sovereignty, consumer sovereignty, determining
Yeah.
who's.
Yeah, Jacob, if I could just interject a perfect example of this. I think many of the viewers and listeners will be familiar with the name Rodney Dangerfield, a wonderful stand-up comic. Now, he tried to do his stand-up comic routine beginning when he was like in his late teens or 20s. And he worked hard. He couldn't get anywhere. In fact, he left the entertainment business and sold aluminum house siding in New Jersey for almost 20 years. Okay? And then he decided to try it again because nobody would hire him. He was like in these little dives making nothing. So he decided to try it again. And I guess his agent or somebody luckily got him a shot on the old Ed Sullivan entertainment show. And suddenly that took off. And then he appeared on the Johnny Carson show. And what happened to Rodney Dangerfield? From no one wanting to pay him a dime for telling jokes, he became a national sensation. He opened Dangerfield, that nightclub and restaurant in New York City. And for the rest of his life, after going selling aluminum siding for 20 years, then in middle age going back to the entertainment field, and suddenly he's a hit. So there's no certainty of either success or failure. It's a matter of what hits and what goes well and what people enjoy or not, and what sort of clicks at a particular time.
Yeah, Dangerfield was known for his line, "I ain't got, I get no respect.
Yes.
I get no respect." So I was reading an article about him recently where he walked out on stage and started to perform his act, and everybody in the audience pulled out a newspaper and started reading it.
Well, listen, he didn't get much respect. He said that the day that he was born, the doctor said to his mother, "We tried everything we could, but he pulled through anyway." I found the doctor picked me up by my little feet and slapped my bottom. I later found out the nurse got a good one in too. When I was a kid, when I was a baby, my mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend.
uh, but your point about the government is another important thing here in this area, because you've been talking about the government should direct what people should make, and that concept arises in people because they don't think it's fair that some make more than others. But I think we should also talk about the redistribution of wealth concept, the
Yes.
equality concept, equalization,
Mhm.
that we need to take from the rich because it's just not fair that they have more in order to give it to those like Richard who has less. And that totally destroys the whole concept of consumer sovereignty and freedom in a free market. That everything we've been talking about, it's subverted with that concept. It's saying no, consumers should not be determining this. We're going to take money from the people they are rewarding with their consumption habits, and we're going to seize it by force in order to give it to people over here. And what you end up doing is not only do you end up destroying freedom in that society, but you actually make everybody worse off because the pie then starts to shrink.
In addition to that, I think that this point that you're raising about the redistribution of wealth, it totally interferes with, and in fact, thwarts the purpose of the price mechanism. The purpose of the price mechanism, as the economist understands the sort of overall working of the system, is to guide the use of resources into those directions, avenues, and niches that best reflect the value that consumers place upon the products that resources and labor could be utilized to bring to the marketplace to satisfy people's consumer demands. Now, when this, a few years ago, that guy, that French economist Pittachy, came out with this book on capital, sort of a restatement of, the injustice of the capitalist system, and that why should a corporate executive make 10 times the salary of the average person working on the shop floor? Well, why does a senior executive in a corporation get the funds that he has? Because the shareholders or the partners in a firm decide that this person has the entrepreneurial insight, the managerial skills to direct the enterprise more successfully than anyone else in enabling them to market a product that will generate the revenue that brings forth the profits and the dividends to the shareholders. Nobody gets that kind of a salary other than what those hiring him think he's worth. And he's working for that company as opposed to some other, because each company, each body of shareholders and the directors acting on behalf of the shareholders decide this person's skills are worth to serve us in serving the consumers to be able to earn profits and be able to pay dividends to the shareholders. Now, it's either the market determines what each person's skill is worth in different corners, performing different tasks to serve others in society in the most effective and efficient way, or it's then the government setting caps on these things. And then what determines the allocation of who should be doing what job and for what purpose and where, given the skills that others decide he has and are worth in their minds in performing task A as opposed to task B. It basically preempts the entire function of the price system and therefore thwarts the ability of supplies to match demands, which includes the allocation of people to do the jobs that others have decided they're best fit in terms of and reflected in the salaries and prices they're willing to pay for services rendered.
Yeah, and you've got these executives in the corporate world that sometimes make $100 million as a salary, and people say, "Oh, that's just unfair. It's wrong." But if this is freely negotiated, and the owners of that company are saying, "Thank you for bringing us $1 billion in revenue," then it all makes sense. Again, it's subjective. What kind of value do they put on the services of that guy that's bringing them $1 billion of revenue? I think before we wrap up, we ought to address the minimum wage concept too, because that fits in this. That when two people get together and enter into an exchange, they're both benefiting from the exchange.
Yes.
They're giving up something they value less for something they value more. And that same principle applies in the labor field. That when a guy comes and says, "I'm willing to work for $5 an hour," and the employer says, "I'm willing to hire you," they're both happy. And this notion that you need the government to set a minimum wage is so atrocious. Why not just leave people free to make that determination? Now they say, "Oh, no, employers have all the bargaining power." That's nonsense. A lot of times employees have much more bargaining power, which is why lots of employers end up having to pay more than the minimum wage, because that's the way the market works. But when they set this minimum and say, "You have to pay this guy $15 an hour. You have to pay everybody $15 an hour," they end up locking out of the labor market every single person who's valued in a subjective sense at less than that artificial minimum. And then what happens to that person? He either goes into the drug trade, illicit drugs because of the drug war, the artificially high prices there that lure them in, or they end up on welfare, but they're locked out of the labor market, Richard, and sometimes in their most formative years, teenage years, early 20s, and so forth.
Yes, just to reinforce that last point, those most affected by minimum wage laws are the young and the unskilled. People who maybe finished high school or often have not finished high school, and they have no formal education. They have had no workplace experience. They've acquired no on-the-job training. And without these things, which, the metaphorical first rung on the ladder of hopefully success, if you can't get your foot on the bottom rung with admittedly a low paying job that reflects your lack of many skills to make you worthwhile hiring, without you having that chance to have that on-the-job training in the broadest sense of all of that entails, so that you can get the skills that will make your current employer think you're worth more over time, or to say, "Look here, I've worked for this guy. I've learned all these skills. I have this on-the-job training. I've moved up. I think I'm worth more than this." And then go see if there's some other employer separate from your current one who says, "Hey, yeah, you're the kind of guy I'm looking for. You're worth X instead of X minus 2, which your current employer has been paying you."
All right. On that fine note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for tuning in, as always. And Richard, as always, I greatly enjoyed the conversation with you, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.